No child should be growing up in poverty.
The two-child benefit cap. To scrap or not to scrap?
In terms of removing the two-child cap, is a win-win situation.
It's such a simple thing for the government to do. It's what a Labour government should be doing.
I think it should remain for some, but not for all.
If it isn't a silver bullet, there would still be millions of children in poverty, so you'd want to do more.
The future of the cap is one of the big question marks hanging over the budget, and it's causing the government a big headache. So what's it all about? Liverpool, Labour Conference 2025.
Your Prime Minister, Mr. Keir Starmer.
The party's been in government for 15 months, and while ministers are busy making announcements on health, education, attacking Reform UK, several media reports claim the Treasury will axe the two-child benefit cap in November's budget. When we approached the Chancellor about them, well, we were met with radio silence.
Three-child cap? 4?
But speaking to party members, a common theme emerges.
Yeah, let's scrap the two-child benefit cap. Let's pull children out of poverty. I think it's cruel.
As soon as it can be afforded, it needs to be taken away. Simple as that.
I just want to see it lifted, but it has to be done in a way that is fiscally responsible.
I think they should scrap it.
Entirely, or just for 2, 3, 4 children? How many, or just unlimited?
Scrap it.
How best to eradicate child poverty is an issue that every Labour member has a view on. So at conferences like this, you can expect the arguments to get pretty heated. Except at this conference here in Liverpool, there was no formal vote on the cap. So the arguments rumble on to the budget. But what actually is the two-child benefit cap? The term benefit cap may sound self-explanatory, but it's not straightforward. There are actually two caps. First, there's a total benefit cap, the maximum amount that you can claim on benefits if you're out of work and between the ages of 16 and state pension age. For most people, that's £22,000 a year. Within the overall benefit cap, if you have children, you get the child element of universal credit. That's worth over £3,500 a year. But whether you're in or out of work, you can only claim that element for your first 2 children. And that is a separate cap, the two-child benefit cap. It applies to any third or additional children born after April 2017, unless they're one of multiple births, like twins or triplets, or were conceived through rape. It also doesn't apply to child benefit. That's a weekly payment for every child as long as parents earn under £60,000 a year. Keeping the two-child cap seems to have broad public support. A YouGov poll in the summer found nearly 3 in 5 voters think it should be kept, compared to just a quarter who want it abolished. But campaigners argue the two-child cap is directly contributing to growing child poverty. They cite the government's own figures, which show there are 400,000 more children in relative poverty now than when the cap came into force. The Child Poverty Action Group estimates the cap is pushing an extra 100 children into poverty every day. But how have we got here? And why was the cap introduced in the first place? Well, in the wake of the financial crash, the coalition government pursued a policy of austerity to get the public finances under control. They decided to tackle the cost of welfare and, in 2013, introduced the overall benefit cap. Then, after winning a narrow majority in 2015, the Conservatives introduced a further cap, the two-child cap.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer.
George Osborne argued it was about fairness.
It's important to support families, but it's also important to be fair to the many working families who don't see their budgets rise by anything like that when they have more children.
And so the cap came into force in 2017. With Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, he was vocally opposed.
I say to the Chancellor again, put this system on hold so it can be fixed and keep 1 million of our children out of poverty.
And his plans for government reflected that. Labour's 2017 manifesto called the cap an attack on low-income families and vowed to reform and redesign universal credit. Their next manifesto in 2019 was even clearer, containing an explicit pledge for scrapping the benefit cap and the two-child limit. But look at Keir Starmer's election-winning manifesto in 2024. Labour will develop an ambitious strategy to reduce child poverty, but nothing on axing the two-child cap. And that is, in part, why it's become an issue now.
It is what they call a Labour landslide, maybe a super majority.
After winning big, lots of Labour MPs thought they had the political space to get rid of this Tory policy. But at the King's speech, there was no announcement on the cap, so the SNP tabled an amendment calling for it to go. And when a fair few Labour MPs suggested they may rebel against the government and support it, Keir Starmer made a concession.
I'm very pleased to have announced today the task force that will lead our strategy to reduce child poverty. No child should be growing up in poverty.
That task force was due to report back in spring 2025, but that was pushed back to later in the year. The King's speech passed, but the new task force wasn't enough for some. 7 Labour MPs still voted for the SNP amendment and were temporarily kicked out of the parliamentary party for it. Rebecca Long-Bailey was one of them. But does she stand by rebelling?
I'll always put the interests of my constituents first, and I've been visited by many families who are impacted by this cap, and it's destroying their life. They cannot sustain their living standards, their children are suffering, and it's such a simple thing for the government to do. It's what a Labour government should be doing, and I really do hope that we see some action on this in the budget.
The government, and to be precise, Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, have been trying to bring down child poverty in other ways. Free breakfast clubs, a cap on the price of school uniforms, and the expansion of free school meals to children whose parents are on universal credit. That's something that she has delivered all in the last year. Yet the two-child cap remains a political bruise that other parties keep pressing. The Liberal Democrats, Greens, Reform UK, Scottish National Party and Plaid Cymru all say they would scrap it, but Reform with the caveat that they must be working British citizens. The Conservatives are the only party promising to keep it in place, but Labour seems divided. Lord Blunkett was Tony Blair's Education Secretary.
I think it should remain for some, but not for all. I think there are individuals who have been widowed. There are individuals where circumstances have dramatically changed for no fault of their own, and they're particularly families with a severely disabled youngster. And I think all of those should be exempt from the cap. I think the remainder of the resource should be placed in support services that help people to get a job, keep a job, and to also follow up on the absent parent.
Other Labour figures want a blanket scrapping, including Kim Johnson, whose Liverpool constituency has one of the highest child poverty rates in the country.
In terms of the cost-benefit analysis, in terms of removing the two-child cap, is a win-win situation. We talk about the high numbers of NEETs that we have in this country. Majority of those kids will come from families that have lived in poverty. So prevention is much better than cure.
But every time the government turns on the spending taps, it's got to find ways to raise the money. So, is it affordable? It's hard to say how much getting rid of the two-child cap would cost because estimates vary. Most groups say scrapping the cap in full would cost between £3 billion and £4 billion a year by the end of this Parliament. For context, total government spending is £1.2 trillion a year. But that would be on top of a welfare bill that's already ballooned. Annual welfare spending has risen by £100 billion in real terms since the start of the century. It's projected to grow by a further £30 billion by 2030. As Work and Pensions Secretary earlier this year, Liz Kendall attempted controversial reforms to stop that figure growing as quickly. But threatened with a major rebellion, the government backed down and in the end effectively made no savings. So any extra spending is tricky at a time when the Chancellor is already having to find tens of billions of pounds to meet her fiscal rules.
We have a situation where we do have very high levels of debt that is now costing us a lot of money. So we should absolutely be thinking about fiscal credibility. Doesn't mean that you can't do some, increase some spending in some cases, but we do have to think about how much we're borrowing. And again, thinking about making sure that the people who are lending money to the government are willing to do that without doing that at a higher price.
Plus, the Labour manifesto promised not to raise VAT, income tax or national insurance, although there are suggestions that that could be broken. Former Prime Minister and Chancellor Gordon Brown has suggested one possible source of extra cash.
If we tax the gambling industry fairly, they're mostly offshore companies. They don't pay VAT. They don't normally pay corporation tax if they're not based in Britain, of course. Then we could raise money. I used to be a finance minister, a chancellor, so I know where you can find money. This is the money. This is what needs to be done. Let's take the first 500,000 children out of poverty.
He estimates taxing online and machine gambling could raise £3 billion a year, enough, he says, to scrap the two-child cap. That idea has gained the support of over 60,000 people in a petition delivered to Downing Street, and in an open letter to the government, over 100 Labour MPs say this is where the money should come from. So while the Treasury works out what they can and can't do in the budget, what are the Chancellor's options? At first glance, the choice looks binary. She could keep the cap, but that would risk angering lots of Labour MPs, or she could scrap the cap altogether, costing several £1 billion a year. But there could be a halfway house. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has been crunching the numbers on some possible alternatives. If the cap is raised from 2 to 3 children, over 400,000 children could be lifted out of poverty, with a price tag of around £2.6 billion. Exempting all children under 5 would be cheaper, but that wouldn't lift as many children out of poverty. But what if there's a tapered system? Full payments for the first 2 children, but, for instance, half the amount for subsequent children. The IFS reckons that would cost about £1.8 billion.
There's no one thing that any government can do that's just going to eradicate child poverty. It's right that you would have to do multiple things. If you're looking at just doing one policy, then the 2-child limit is a relatively effective way in terms of like cost per child lifted out of poverty. It's one of the cheapest ways you can lift children out of poverty. But it isn't a silver bullet. There would still be millions of children in poverty, so you'd want to do more.
It may not be a silver bullet, but the Chancellor still faces a choice. Her party remains divided on the best way to tackle child poverty, but they agree it must come down under a Labour government. As ever in politics, there's a trade-off for the Treasury. The big question now is what comes out of that red box on budget day.